The thing I always find interesting about the design of the Ferengi is I don't know why they felt the need to make the heads so hideous. Like, I mean, especially there's a couple of Ferengi who it really just looks like they've got a big old ball sack right under their forehead. It's deeply unappealing.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it's a holdover from like the early seasons of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they just had to come up with something, and they really didn't want to just do the wrinkly forehead and maybe a pointy ear. It's like, let's give you like a whole skull cap that's just, you're gonna be sitting with that for hours, and it's gonna make you angry, and it's gonna make you like our new villain with like a weird whip, and then 4 years later we're gonna be like, no, that's terrible. You guys are gonna be like bartenders. And this is what every bartender's going to look like from now on Star Trek.
It is funny how some cast members on Star Trek would have had to spend like 9 hours in prosthetics and makeup, and then other cast members would have just had like, oh, you know, the cheeky little nose ridge, and then that's it. Like, I think some people lucked out on that.
Well, yeah, well, especially with the episode we're going to be talking about. Like, that's this entire episode. You have to think there must have been a combined like 1,000 hours of makeup, because every principal actor in this is under like full nose and full ears, and in some cases like chin and like weird neck veiny things, and
those horrible Ferengi teeth. Ugh.
Just a whole Gary Busey's worth of teeth like right up front.
Oh, but it's like Gary Busey if he was like a demon from hell. They're all jagged and horrible.
Isn't he a little bit?
Well, yeah, more so of a
By
demon
now?
from hell. Maybe a demon from a different part of hell.
Yeah.
All right, Andy Webb, welcome to Re-AniMates.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted to have you because, unbeknownst to me, I guess I made the connections later, that you wrote an article for StarTrek.com, I think it was?
Yes, the official Star Trek website, StarTrek.com.
Yeah, which pops up every single time I Google Jeffrey Combs in some sort of Star Trek capacity, which is a rundown of his various appearances on the show on Deep Space Nine, which are many. It's like when I first started doing this podcast, I wasn't as into the sci-fi parts of his career as I came through horror. Yeah, it was interesting to see just how many characters he had played and how different they all are, and I was like, wow, he's even more amazing than I thought.
I did that article a few years ago, and I guess I've cornered the market on like a subculture within a subculture's SEO, let's say.
Very niche.
Very, very niche. It's a hat on a hat on a hat, as they say. And that article has circulated out there for a while. I have seen other websites take that article with the same exact screenshots and do their own version, which tells me a lot about what Jeffrey Combs related SEO must be like. Apparently that's that's one of StarTrek.com's most popular articles, because they repost it all the time. Which I guess if as of the last couple of weeks, I would have to update that article because he's been back. He's been on the animated show Lower Decks as an evil computer, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's been about 15 years since he's been on that. But the episode we're talking about today is about 20 years old, and it's featuring the first Ferengi he played, and he played another Ferengi later, and it's a very different Ferengi. He's a very talented man, this Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think that's the overall ethos of this podcast, is that he's very talented. Well, before we get into the episode, I mean, what's your... Like, I've mentioned on this podcast a million times that I came to Jeffrey through horror, specifically The Frighteners and then later Re-Animator.
Yeah. It
sounds like your tunnel into Jeffrey Combs' adoration, fandom, whatever you want to call it. It sounds like it was through Star Trek. Was that the first thing you would have seen him in?
Yeah, it would definitely have to be. And then I think it's sort of in this soup of my teens, like watching Deep Space Nine on DVD, because that was about the point in time when they were re-releasing all of Star Trek on DVD. And so that's where I watched Deep Space Nine. I was a little young to be watching it while it was in syndication on broadcast when it was first airing. And my parents liked Next Generation and Voyager, but they weren't watching Deep Space Nine. At some point, when you're like a young horror nerd also, and you're like 14 or 15, and somebody's like, have you heard of this X-rated horror movie, Re-Animator? And, you catch it at some point, and you're like, yeah, this movie's hilarious. There's nothing remotely scary about it. It's just a lot of fun. And yeah, so it's always just been truly like a on my Mount Rushmore of like weird genre actors. He would definitely make the four on that mountain.
At time of recording, I literally watched Re-Animator last night because I was in a bit of a shit mood and just feeling a bit flumpy, and I just wanted something comforting.
Yes.
That's what peak performance looks like.
Yes.
Is Herbert West.
Absolutely. And when I really want to get pumped up, I put on the techno song from the third Re-Animator, and I watch that
Move
video.
your dead bones.
I love to move my dead bones. I love for that hunky doctor to tell me to move my dead bones.
Reanimate your feet.
I'm gonna dance to Move Your Dead Bones at my wedding.
Wow, man, missed opportunity. I got married 2 weeks ago. That could have just been a big moment for me.
So, as mentioned, we're finally doing some Deep Space Nine. Obviously, I did Voyager some time ago, and it's taken a while to work up to Deep Space. I mean, because there's so many episodes, and to be honest, I haven't worked out if I wanted to do only the key episodes in terms of the episodes that he's done across all 7 or 8 seasons. So when we started talking about what things you wanted to cover for this podcast, this is the one you chose. I mean, your reasoning for it was very good too.
Yes, that it's a bunch of people in goofy makeup and they reanimate a body, which that just makes for good Jeffrey Combs content, in my opinion. I sort of thought about maybe doing the Masters of Horror, but I've talked about those before on other podcasts. I actually did an episode of another podcast a few years ago about specifically like the Stuart Gordon, Barbara Crampton, Jeffrey Combs like collaborations, and I never really gotten a chance to like but I never really gotten a chance to like talk about Star Trek and in relation to him, at least in like at length in a setting like this where we can really just like dig into it. And but I also didn't want to do one of the ones like Deep Space Nine gets very complicated the longer it goes on. It gets very sort of like lore heavy, and there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of context. But this is one of those, and maybe we can sort of get into specifically how this show managed its episodes and the way that it used characters. But it was not afraid to just like do a goofy one-off. This episode has no B plot. It's just Ferengi antics for 45 minutes, and it's really funny, I think, and has a really like murderer's row of like fun actors bouncing off of each other the entire time.
Yeah, it's literally just one of those comedy episodes. I think it had an amazing reception in terms of the way people felt about it. Like, it came in a lot of like top 100 lists in terms of best episodes. Vulture.com rated this episode the 11th best episode of Deep Space Nine.
And I think if we've been looking at the same research, they mentioned that at the 50th anniversary convention of Star Trek that happened in 2016, there was like a fan, like one of the panels was Let's Rank episodes as a large group, and I was in that room at the time when they did that, because that happened here in New York City. And that was just very, very funny that the people who go to conventions are going to be the most highly opinionated, right? The most inclined to like really argue for their choices. And this one, and it was out of all of Star Trek. I think it wasn't even just Deep Space Nine. It was out of all like 700. Now it's like 800 episodes. Like this is like one of the top 10. Which might be debatable depending on what you want from your Star Trek, but I might be inclined to agree with that listing. It's just a lot of fun.
It is interesting that you chose a Ferengi episode, which means that Jeffrey Combs is playing Brunt, the regular Ferengi character that he played, as opposed to a episode where he plays a Vorta, a Weyoun,
right?
Which I feel like, this is just my observation, that I feel like generally Weyoun is probably a bit more popular as a character than Brunt. Would you say that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Weyoun matters more. He's certainly more integral to the overall plot of the show. Brunt is like a foil for Quark. He exists if people are like, oh, well, Quark is like if Quark is like the bad character of the main character of Deep Space Nine, like the most like the least moral, let's say, or the most like gray in terms of how he rubs up against like Starfleet's morality and their concept of ethics. And, you know, he's the one who's like, I'm the capitalist and you guys are all weirdos from where I'm sitting. But Brunt is the one who is like, no, this is actually like the bad version of Quark. He's sort of the actual like the worst instincts, the most just willing to get in your way for like, you know, the most willing to cause problems on purpose for no other reason than to just like be petty. He's the most petty of the sort of tertiary, like, semi-villainous characters that recur over time. You know, Wei-Un at least has like a purpose that he's working towards, and that varies depending on the Wei-Un in the episode. What I also like about this episode is you get other Vorta, which you don't typically get. Usually Wei-Un is like it's the very Star Trek thing where like one character stands in for the entire like totality of this species or civilization a lot of the time. And so when you get the different Vortas, they're always a little quirky in a different way, and this one you get two of them and they're just so over it the entire episode. They don't want to be here. They're sick of this. They're especially tired of dealing with Ferengi. And so you get a sort of different shades of what you're used to up to that point, you know, 6 seasons into a television show.
Brunt is, I think, your classic messy bitch who loves drama.
Absolutely.
I mean, all of the different characters that Jeffrey Combs plays in across Deep Space Nine, they all serve very different purposes. And Brunt is definitely more of a... He's pretty much playing comedy. Like, he bursts in any episode like Kramer, and, you know, he's just like, hello, I'm here to be mischievous. He never gets, like, a particularly, like, redemptive emotional arc or anything.
No, absolutely not. I mean, like, the whole thing is a send-up of, you know, the Magnificent Seven or the Seven Samurai, where, like, everybody they bring in has a purpose. And when Brunt comes in, he's not even somebody they go to. He was just like, I have a ship, and that's the only reason you're going to bring me along, because you have to. Because I knew before I walked in here that you wouldn't want me to come along, but I've got the one thing over your head that means you have to take me along, and you got to pay me at the end of this. And he's thriving off of that sort of reluctance.
Well, let's get into the episode. So this is season 6, episode 10, The Magnificent Ferengi, 1997, directed by Chip Chalmers. Great name. I think this was his first... I mean, he went on to do more, but I believe this is his first Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, he did this, and he did another comedy episode. He only did 2. He did this and the baseball episode. So yeah, he's just one of those guys, especially when they were doing those comedy episodes late in the series run. It seems like he had like a thing that he did, and he excels at it because these are two really good episodes. Yeah, so we're directed by Chip Chalmers and we're written by Ira Steven Behr and Hans Beimler. I mean, Ira Steven Behr being like at that point in time like the driving force behind Deep Space Nine. Like the show was really like his baby. Like a lot of Star Trek, it's kind of up and down in the first few seasons, and he was there at the beginning of Deep Space Nine. He left because he just wasn't having a good time, and eventually. I think it's around season 4 when they bring Worf on, they sort of retool the show. He's back in and sort of in control for the rest of it. But he was the Ferengi guy. So all the Ferengi episodes are written by Ira Steven Behr. If not by himself, then him and another person. And he just liked to do goofy stuff with them.
Well, from what I've heard in interviews and from, I think a little bit from the Deep Space Nine documentary is... The Ferengi, as well as being kind of comedic, are meant to be, I guess, a satirical comment on, like, American capitalism, basically, and consumerism. Like, that's why they're so, like, absurdly materialistic and obsessed with, with money, and it's also why they're actually kind of, like, you know, they have quite archaic social rules, shall we say.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something... The Ferengi definitely. I mean, they were when they're introduced literally in like the first season of the Next Generation. They're not that. They have no identity. They were meant to be the new Klingons, but they just weren't. They don't function that way. They never work. That's why they eventually created like the Borg and some of the like the Cardassians and the other stuff that get introduced in that show and then get pulled in over here. I think when they really had the idea for Deep Space Nine to be like, we're sort of away from the Federation. We're not a ship going to like different planets righting wrongs. We're in a location that's different cultures are going to come in and they're not going to necessarily be down for what the Federation is selling. in terms of their outlook and their worldview, and so the Ferengi are part of that, right? It's sort of a foil for like let's test the morals and the convictions of our Starfleet characters against somebody who has zero interest in being a part of any of that. You know, before the Ferengi, like the concept of Latinum didn't exist. The concept of like actually having to think about like currency being traded at all didn't really exist on Next Generation or previous Star Trek shows, because the idea from Roddenberry was always like money doesn't exist. People just have what they need. Like, we're a post-scarcity culture. But also one of the driving things about Deep Space Nine, it's like it's post-scarcity for you and the Federation, but not for everybody else. You know, you have a finite sphere of influence, and you sort of need to come back down to earth every once in a while and recognize that. So it's that commentary on like the sort of American consumerism and the materialism, but it's also for if the Federation, you know, the way that like the Federation is sort of an idealized like let's spread democracy around the galaxy from an American perspective. It's also that reminder that it's just like not everybody's going to want that, dude, and they're going to have weird cultural stuff that you're uncomfortable with, but you have to learn how to interact with them and sort of come to them on their own terms.
Yeah, and I would say that this episode, even though it's quite comedic and silly in some ways, it actually shows a huge amount of, I guess, tenderness in possibly in amongst the Ferengi. You know, it shows them being not only a little bit sentimental, but also cooperative and willing to change in some ways, willing to bend on their perhaps usually inflexible rules. But I mean, certainly for Quark, it shows a slightly different side that you don't normally see to him. Oh
yeah, I mean, it starts with him getting sort of jealous that what he thinks are like tales of heroism and legend. Like, I think is it Odo that says that like a story about you earning profit isn't interesting to anyone. That's just your ledger going up. When our normal Starfleet Deep Space Nine heroes come back and they're just like, we're the only ship that made it back from the Dominion for the first time, and we rescued a bunch of people, and everybody's like, yay! And Quark's like, why am I not getting that? So he sort of feels a little bit more like he has to go put himself at risk in a way that isn't financial,
which he gets the chance to do because like right after he's, you know, complaining that he doesn't get the same sort of attention as the heroes, he gets a call from the Grand Nagus. And also, so obviously normally if I'm covering an episode that's like one episode of a series or a multi-series show, normally I would kind of do some background and talk about different characters and who they are in relation to the overall plot and show, but I think with this one, it's just going to be too hard to cover everything, because Deep Space Nine is a huge show. So, listener, my dear, you are going to have to perhaps know a little bit about Deep Space Nine for this episode, because, yeah, not going to do too much background, otherwise we will be here for 9 to 10 hours. We'll probably talk more about the characters that only come up either in just this episode or infrequently. Quark gets a call from the Grand Nagus telling him that Moogie, his mother, has been kidnapped by the Dominion, and he wants Quark to rescue her. He obviously goes straight to Rom, his brother, for help. I mean, immediately you're like, come on. You know, I know that you want your brother's help, but like, you know, Rom isn't like he's a nice guy.
It's not the most proactive, heroic character out there, let's say.
So already his team is perhaps a bit shaky, but he has confidence in Rom, and that's what's important, and he's willing to share his substantial reward.
And I love that their conversation, they're crawling through these tunnels, I guess they're technically Jeffrey's tubes, even though we're not on a starship, leads to one of the best, like, just straight comedy gags in all of Star Trek, which is where they're having the normal, like, walk and talk through the tunnels, and then they open a vent, and they're in Captain Sisko's ready room, and he's just sitting there, and he's like, how can I help you? And they're just like, we must have made a wrong turn, and they just leave, and that's the only time you see Avery Brooks. The entire episode is for this one comedy bit.
God, I love Avery Brooks. Like, I mean, like, obviously I love Jeffrey, you know, but I'm always disappointed when I watch a Deep Space Nine episode and he's not in it enough, because I love him so much. God, he's so fucking good.
Yeah, and it's funny, because even if he's not in it enough, sometimes it's because he's also directing, because he directed a lot of the show as well. But yeah, he's great.
Yeah, we actually do see him once more very briefly later, but this moment is so silly because he doesn't appear to be doing anything at his desk. He's literally just sitting there. It's like, It's like, what were you doing? Just hanging out, sitting at your desk, staring into space? He's just like...
He's waiting for his Zoom call to start. Like,
yeah. I'm waiting to be called on.
Yes, very, 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 very funny bit of business.
Yeah, it's classic, like, sitcom business.
Exactly.
Quark decides that he needs a team of Ferengi. He's like, only Ferengi are going to be trustworthy enough to do this. They enlist Nog by making him the strategic officer of the mission, playing into how much he wants to be like Worf.
Yep.
They also enlist an eliminator called Lek, played by Hamilton Camp, who I imagine is like a Ferengi hitman. I don't know much about Lek.
Yeah, he's... this is one of the... I mean, it's sort of what I was talking about earlier about how all of a sudden you get different kinds of, like, the one type of this race or civilization. You're getting all these different actual... They're not all just these, like, profit-focused, like, day traders that you get with a lot of the Ferengi. Some of them are mercenaries or ship captains or stuff like that. So Lek is part of this sort of expansion of what a Ferengi can be.
He's quite menacing. I think he's only done a couple of episodes of Deep Space Nine, which is probably why perhaps I'm not as familiar with him. But yeah, he's a bit horrible. But the actor's doing well, though. He's making him horrible, which I assume is the point. They go to see Quark's cousin, Gala. Quark's gotten him into a bit of trouble, but Quark's paid his fine in an astounding show of generosity and recruited him too.
Sorry, it's played by an actor named Josh Pace, who was Raphael in the first Ninja Turtles movie.
Ah, that's
like, I was looking at his credits, and I was like, this is the only thing that I think I would ever actually have seen you from, because it's just one of those, like, 90s TV guys that was just in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. They all meet in Quark's bar to discuss, and they are met with your friend and mine, Liquidator Brunt, Jeffrey Combs! Yay!
Woo!
Jeff! It's, although in this episode, Brunt is no longer a liquidator. He's been fired, it seems.
Yes, it's in that weird period where Quark got one over on him. I don't remember if it was earlier in the season or a season before, but the last time we saw Brunt, he had sort of been stripped of his title and was out there just sort of having to make it on his own. So this is like, he's trying to find a way back in and thinks if he can, give them his ship and get in the good graces of... the Grand Nagus, who I forgot we don't actually see the Grand Nagus in this episode. We get no Wallace Shawn.
No.
Showing up, which, always a delight to see with his increasingly melted Ferengi appearance.
We are slightly poorer for not having any Wallace Shawn, but we do have a huge amount of other Ferengis. Can't move for Ferengis in this episode. Brunt gets on side with them because he has a ship. That is very helpful to them, because they are literally just talking about how they don't have a ship.
Yep.
I like Brunt's outfit, because he looks like a ringmaster.
Yes, he has that little tails and the sort of shoulder pads, and he's looking like he's ready to give you the greatest show.
He's a fancy man.
He's a fancy man.
He's a Ferengi dandy.
Yeah, he's sort of... I mean, that was always the thing. It was like him and Quark dress sort of the same, but Brunt's always been a little bit more high status. But now he's sort of pretending at it a little bit, trying to maintain appearances.
Well, the team... They start trading in a holosuite, and they fail miserably. Like, I think Lek kills Moogie in the simulation because he's like, we weren't going to catch her anyway, so I put her out of her misery.
Yeah, it's just, Lek is just there to do the job, and he's there to get out.
Yeah, they are not good at combat, but what Quark and Rom realize is that they are, as Ferengi, they are better at doing deals, wheeling and dealing, than active combat. So they're like, all right, how can we turn this into like some sort of deal, an exchange? Kira gets Starfleet to help Quark by giving him a prisoner to exchange. So we have the whole Ferengi team, and they have their Vorta prisoner, Kivan, played by Christopher Shea. He's doing a similar sort of Vorta to Weyoun, or the way that Jeffrey Combs plays Weyoun, which is, this sort of resigned, high-voiced, condescending, world-weary, holier-than-thou kind of Vorta.
And he's tired. Yeah, he's just playing that exhaustion. He's like, I was supposed to die, I didn't. And now I'm sort of trapped, just sort of being pushed around from cell to cell, waiting for anything to happen.
Yeah, he's classic, like, I'm surrounded by idiots. This is also the only other scene that we get Sisko in when Cork is meeting with
Right.
Kira, and it just goes there. And again, he's sitting behind the desk. It reminds me of like in sitcoms when they're trying to hide that a female actress is pregnant.
So they've moved that lamp in front of her, or
Yeah,
dressed
just-
her in a baggier coat.
Just a big, it seems to be like standing strangely behind a big plant. Like, why? Maybe Avery Brooks was just like, I just want to sit down.
It's in my contract that I get to sit down.
I want to rest.
Hold my baseball and turn it around in my hand while we have a conversation.
So they're on Empok Nor, which seems to be kind of the same sort of outlay as DS9. I think that's why they chose it.
Because they're familiar with the terrain. Also, I would imagine the cost of makeup and guest stars on this was so high that they could not build new sets. So this is just a production thing where it's like, we just have the set. We've done this before. We've been to Empok Nor before. It's a little bit nicer looking right now, but it's just Deep Space Nine with the lights turned off.
Yep, and a few more boxes sort of shifted around places. Yeah, it kind of looks like Deep Space Nine on moving day. They're setting their base camp, and Kivan slips away while they're sleeping. I'm not sure what he's trying to do when he slips away. I'm not sure if he's trying to send a message or if he's just trying to escape.
Well, he tries to fire the thrusters, and they don't turn on because Rom's turned them off. Or he's disconnected them, so he's trying to drive the ship away. And Quark is like, we had Rom disconnected, and he's like, well, then why did you follow me? And it's because sometime Rom screws up.
Anyway, they catch him. And pretty soon the Dominion ship approaches, and there's a whole mess of Jem'Hadar soldiers on the ship. So many. There's so many.
So many. So much latex and styrofoam on those guys.
Like, it's such a quick shot of all of them. Like, imagine how much time they were spent in makeup for, like, not even really seeing them very well. It must have been a pain in the ass.
The whole place just must have smelled like a rubber factory that day.
Oh, sweaty rubber. I remember hearing a story about Rene Auberjonois when he was playing Odo, where he obviously had that entire face mask for his changeling head. A great story, I think Ira Stephen Bear tells it, where he must have just gotten sick of wearing it for a long time, a long shoot, and he just tears it off, and it's sweaty and disgusting, and he throws it at Ira Stephen Bear, and I think he still has it. I think in the DS9 documentary, I think Ira Stephen Bear says, yeah, I've got it in glass in my office. Probably still as disgusting as it would be.
You just gotta imagine it's gotta look like what Michael Myers' mask looks like now in the new Halloween movies, right? Like, it's just gotta be, like, degraded and cracked, and that stuff doesn't last.
No, I mean, yeah, like, Jeff obviously does talk about how long they had to spend in makeup. Obviously more so for the Ferengi as opposed to the Vorta, but
definitely.
Oh, yeah, God, it would just be so... I think the Ferengi are a bit worse because it's more of a whole head thing, and it's apparently a lot harder to see and hear and move in those things, so... Well,
yeah, because every sense is being blocked in some way or another. You have, like, the brow over your eyes, you have the ears on your ears, you have the nose piece, and you have the stuff, like the teeth in your mouth. Like, that's literally everything is being messed with in some way. So you got to be really good about it. So even like when LeVar Burton on Next Generation couldn't see anything ever because he had that visor on his head the entire time, and that's literally just a strip like this. So you had to get really good about just understanding like how far your body, like you're being like mastering your body language, and knowing like if you got to turn a little bit more to be able to see what you need to see, you got to figure out how that works.
I can definitely see how people didn't realize how many characters Jeffrey Combs played in DS9, especially when it comes to the Ferengi, because frankly he's unrecognizable as like you look at him as Wayud and you're like, yeah, he's got the ears and the hair and the contacts, but you still know it's him. Whereas, if I didn't know who I was looking for, I wouldn't have known that was Jeffrey Combs. Like, the voice comes through pretty well, but he's doing much more of a voice for Brunt than he does for Wayud. And yeah, like all the makeup, it makes them pretty unrecognizable. I mean, the most recognizable Ferengi is Quark, because Armin Shimmerman has those incredibly piercing eyes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, something I'm struck by when you see them all together, it's still, even though you sort of have this conception of like what a Ferengi looks like, they are still all distinct faces, which can be difficult when you're not used to having, because if you look at like Jem'Hadar tend to all look the same.
Yeah.
Right, because they're grunts. Like there's so many of them that have to get exploded in a given episode that you kind of just got to get people in that makeup as fast as you can.
They're just
but
muscle.
For characters, yeah, they're just muscle. But for characters like these, where like they're all talking, they all have a personality. There's all a different actor. Like those are all different molds. It's all different stuff being done, and it's all like it's a really great job. They try this again in an Enterprise episode later on, and the makeup gets a little bit better, but for the first time out with like that many different Ferengi on screen that all have to do a bit, they all have to read for an audience. I think they do a really, really stellar job with the makeup in this case.
Yeah, especially because the way Ferengi look, they do have to look a certain way, so there's only so much you can change them, because it's not like you can have completely different, too many different aspects. So Quark, Rom, and Nog meet with the Vorta Yelgrun, played by Iggy Pop.
Mr. Iggy Pop.
The very same. He's great.
He's great, but he never at once in this episode, when he has plenty of opportunity, calls somebody a stooge, and he could have done it. And I wish that he did.
Maybe they felt it was too on the nose.
It's too on the nose. Iggy Pop is already there. It's too reality breaking enough, because it's just Iggy Pop's face. He has a perfect face for makeup.
He's not playing a Vorta the same way that
no.
the other actor in this episode does, or Jeffrey Combs does. Like, I would say that he's playing it more as like a solemn cowboy.
It's that the resonance of his voice. Although at times I was like, it sounds like Roger Corman a little bit. Like, you've ever heard Roger Corman speak?
Yeah.
He's like, "Hello, Ferengi."
Yeah, it's still Iggy Pop. Like, because he's not really an actor. Like, this is more of it's a little bit of stunt casting. But it's hugely fun because it's fucking Iggy Pop. He's a lovely guy.
Well, yeah, it's like when you see Alice Cooper show up and stuff. Like when he's in like Prince of Darkness or something, and it's like that's just Alice Cooper doing Alice Cooper stuff.
Yeah,
but it's fun, and it's this. I think this is the second time that a musician has like done a bit part on. I mean, not counting the guy who plays Vic Fontaine, who's like actually Bobby Darin's son, who's also actually a real musician. But in Next Generation, Mick Fleetwood shows up in full mask makeup. You cannot tell it's him. He doesn't have a line. He's just playing one of these fish aliens that Worf looks at on the transporter pad and says, "What a handsome race." He's in love with this Mick Fleetwood fish person. So
Yelgrun has Moogie. Moogie's played by Cecily Adams. She's great.
It's Moogie 2, because originally it was Andrea Martin. So Andrea Martin was the first Moogie. And then, because the makeup's so good for Ishka or Moogie that you don't notice when they change actors. But I would imagine Andrea Martin, being a big comedy legend, was a little too busy to be recurring as frequently as Cecily Adams does over the show. But we love Cecily Adams. I like Moogie a lot. That's a fun character.
Yeah, and I think especially she's a bit like the Grand Nagas, where you don't see her that often, but when you do see them, they make a huge impression.
Yes.
They go to make the deal, and they're like, okay, good, let's do a trade. This is going to be fine. And unfortunately, back amongst the Ferengi, a fight ensues over the reward, and Lek inadvertently shoots and kills Keevan. Whoops.
Oopsie.
Classic scrapes.
Oh, well, it's that thing where it's like when you have an episode with no Starfleet characters in the main action of it. If this happened in the Starfleet characters would be standing around being like, well, no, now we have to like make good with these people. We failed at the negotiation, and instead the Ferengi decide to do something completely bizarre and totally like not at all what you would usually get in your general Star Trek episode that is perhaps trying to tell you like a moral at the end of it.
Obviously, Jeffrey Combs has, a lot of fun moments as Brunt in this episode, but probably my favorite is this scream he does.
You've had this coming for a long time, cousin!
So they manage to summon their strength and all of their cunning, and they develop a plan. They're going to use neural stimulators to make it seem as if Keevan is still alive. They just basically put a whole bunch of stimulators all over his body. I don't know if this is good science. I'm not a doctor.
It's Star Trek science.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor or a scientist.
Isn't that what Nog says? He says, I'm not a doctor, I'm an engineer.
Yeah, he's like, medicine is basically engineering. And I'm like, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not well versed in either of those disciplines, so I'm gonna have to take your word for it. And they do a bang up job, because when they do get him up and running, he seems, I mean, he doesn't seem well, but he seems alive.
Yes, yet another functional reanimation with Jeffrey Combs standing by.
Yes, exactly. Like, yet another time when a creature is technically alive, but not doing well. They're not having, like, a good life, you know?
No.
And here's just a little clip of basically Iggy Pop being menacing.
You see, a diversified financial portfolio can mean greater profits and healthier-looking skin.
Fascinating. I'd love to hear more, but if your son doesn't show up soon, I'm afraid I'm going to have to kill you.
I'm not entirely sure how it works. So Nog has like a remote that he's managing to control all of the neural stimulators on Kevon's body. So he's like, it's like remote control man.
Yeah, I would imagine it's a little bit like that. I don't know if you ever played that like flash game on the internet called Quap,
no.
where it's like you have, it's like, because I think it's for the keys on the keyboard that you're using, but you basically have to move like a stick man, like it's almost like joint by joint. It becomes like a physics thing where you're having to like balance, because in the game, if you lift the knee up, you have to then move the leg below the knee to make sure it's angled the right way. And if you don't, then your stickman falls over and it looks hilarious. But
Oh, no.
With the way Kevin's up and moving around, it sort of reminded me like he's having to do some sort of like futuristic version of Quap to keep this Vorta moving in a way that sort of resembles reality.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that Yelgren falls for this for as long as he does. I mean, eventually the jig is up, but he does consider that it's fine for quite a while, even though it's very obviously not fine. They sense something is amiss when Kevon just keeps like bumping into a wall. Like, you know, when you're like not very good at video games? Like, you know, when you're not very good at video games and you just keep like smashing into the same wall, you can't quite get out of a corner. It's very silly. Like, you know, like fair play to that actor, because he's doing a fun job of just bashing into this wall as if he has no control over his body. So the Jem'Hadar start firing. I think there's only a couple of Jem'Hadar because Quark gets Yelgren to take the rest off the ship. So I think there's only like 2 or 3, maybe?
Yeah, they're off the ship and they move them over to closer to where their ship's airlock is, so that they can make Quark can make a quicker escape. Which is yet another thing that Yelgren weirdly falls for what is supposed to be like the smart, like master planning sort of Dominion type. He's making some comedy villain mistakes in this. It's almost like the three amigos are getting one over on him in some way.
Well, the Ferengi managed to take him down, though. Like, they managed to take down the Jem'Hadar. They don't take down Yelgren, so they take him prisoner instead. Basically, the episode ends on a very nice moment between Quark and Rom, just having this like congratulatory nice moment together. I mean, the very last moment of the episode is, of course, the overly stimulated body of Kevon bashing into a wall repeatedly, presumably just being left there until...
just forever?
Yeah, until he, I don't know, just crumbles into a heap. Like...
It's horrifying. It's maybe the darkest ending to any episode of Star Trek.
It's like, how long do neural stimulators last? Oh my god, he's going to be there for years. Oh, poor Kevon.
Somebody else is going to arrive there and just find this guy bumping into the corner, and they're going to have to Weekend and Bernie's him around until they figure out what's going on.
And that's the Magnificent Ferengi. That's the episode. Just one of your slightly, you know, puffy pieces, but bit of good fun. Little bit of a, you know, Ferengi redemption. And most importantly, Jeffrey Combs.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, it's just, it's fun. I know these episodes sometimes, depending on what kind of Star Trek fan you are, they can grate on you because they're not after the big ideas or whatever, but I say there's 700 episodes of Star Trek, so why don't you relax every once in a while?
Like, I haven't seen all of Deep Space Nine because it can be a little bit hard when the show... I'm actually the opposite, where it can be a little bit hard when the show is in the deep throes of an arc. So it's a little bit hard to just come and go. Like, you know, that's the sort of time when binge watching is perfect. And I'm not as much of a binge watcher. Like, you know, despite being not only a millennial, but somebody who is in lockdown currently in Melbourne, I'm actually not very good at binge watching. So I'm actually a lot better with these episodes, the ones that maybe have like a bit of a bottle episode.
Yeah, it's Deep Space Nine is still probably like intellectually like my favorite Star Trek show, but I sort of similar to you, like I have a hard time like watching a lot of it at once. Part of that is because we're used to shows being like 10 episodes long these days for a season, and when you're like, oh, every season's like 25 episodes,
yeah,
it's like I gotta, like early in quarantine, around March or April last year, I was like, I'm gonna watch ER. I've never watched ER, so I made it through, when we were truly trapped at home and had like nothing. I mean, I know our quarantine's been different than yours down there, but I watched 10 seasons of ER, and then eventually had to stop because I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's just too much. I've figured out where the line is for too much television. But yeah, usually if I'm like, I want to watch Star Trek for a while, I just put on a bunch of episodes, and I'll put on Next Gen because the episodes are pretty much self-contained. There's not a lot of like stuff to worry about from episode to episode, but every once in a while you get some like light continuity, and that show is like being on a cruise ship that's just all carpeted and has like wood paneling everywhere, and it's got sort of like a different texture than Deep Space Nine does. So yeah, so when I come back to watch Deep Space Nine, I always think about these episodes rather than sort of the more highfalutin, important story arcs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's obviously not to say that those episodes that deal with, the overarching plot and stuff aren't good. Like, not only are they good, but they're important to the plot. And I would say that probably my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine is one of the most heartbreaking, which is Far Beyond the Stars. I mean, that is just,
yes,
like that is not technically, I don't think, like integral to the overarching, the Dominion War and everything, but it's brilliant. It's amazing, and it's it's so heartbreaking.
It puts a stake in the ground around themes that Star Trek typically never tackled head on, quite in the way that episode does. Another one with Jeffrey Combs, just looking like himself.
I think most of my favorite episodes of any kind of Star Trek are the ones that feel like really good episodes of the Twilight Zone. And I know that they're often like, Twilight Zone is often more directly horror than sci-fi, but some of the best Twilight Zone ones are the ones that are like based on a really amazing horror or sci-fi short story that's been done incredibly well and has like really good moral message, really good acting. And I think that, like, comparatively, I think I feel the same way about Star Trek, where that's what I like in Star Trek. I also read that, this may or may not be true. This is from I think one of the Deep Space Nine fandom wiki. Apparently, Iggy Pop was originally supposed to play Grady in Past Tense Part 2, which was played by Clint Howard.
Yeah, right.
Which would have meant that he would have just looked like himself in that. He wouldn't have had to dress as an alien or anything. So that would have been interesting, just having like straight Iggy Pop in an episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got the more fun version, which is you get a famous person and put them in makeup, right? And sort of see what they do playing, because you would just be a person in that, and you can sort of predict what that might be. But I want to see what Iggy Pop's take on like a weird sort of austere alien bureaucrat might be. There
is a quote from Ira Stephen Bear who says that he was thrilled to work with Iggy Pop, but he was a little annoyed with himself for casting him as a Vorta. He said, "His physicality is certainly part of who he is, and unfortunately we cast him as a Vorta, one of the most immobile of characters. But he really got that demented quality the Vorta have, like Wayun has. Think Caligula. He was just a delight." That's nice. And another quote I liked was from Armin Shimmerman after this episode, where he said that the episode was a hoot. He said, "We were surrounded by these wonderful comedic actors playing the other Ferengi, Jeff Combs, Josh Pace, Hamilton Camp, and Cecily Adams. I stood back half a step and let them do their stuff and responded to their antics because they were so funny. I can't tell you what a treat it was to watch each of these truly talented performers chew up more scenery than I'd ever seen chewed before and make it all work beautifully."
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. Have you ever been to, I guess, your Star Trek is sort of something you've sort of come to more recently. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I never watched sci-fi stuff as a kid, not even much as a young adult. I think I The very first Star Trek I got into was Next Gen, but in terms of like more recently, I got into Jeffrey Combs through horror, and so I got into DS9 through Jeffrey Combs.
Sure.
Yeah, and DS9 is probably the only one I've stuck with, because obviously he did Enterprise, he did One Thing of Voyager. You know, it's like the others are fine. Like, I don't particularly like Enterprise that much.
That's fair.
Yeah, something about DS9 is just, I don't know, just stuck with me a bit more, and I feel like I could watch it even if Jeffrey Combs isn't in the episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's the show that was sort of left alone. It was always the sort of afterthought while it was being made, because when it started, Next Gen was still on, and then I think it maybe only had 1 year where there wasn't another Star Trek thing. Yeah, Next Gen was still on, then Voyager was in production, and then Voyager premiered, but Voyager was the thing that launched UPN. It was the first show that they had. So all of the producers' attention, what they thought people wanted from Star Trek, was being put into Voyager, which is kind of why Voyager is the way that it is, in terms of being a little generic at times and not a lot of growth, because they were trying to do Next Gen again, despite the fact that they had a premise that couldn't support it. Deep Space Nine was kind of left alone to be experimental and be a little weirder. But I brought up asking sort of if you'd come to it recently, because I was at that convention that was sort of mentioned earlier in the episode, and I just sat in a room basically for an entire day and watched like the panels where all of the different casts would come out and just like do an hour of like Q&A or talking about stuff or whatever. And you can tell that, like, so many of these people on these shows bonded a lot and were clearly having a lot of fun with each other and being around each other. And I think oftentimes that comes across, especially with the TNG cast and especially with most of the Deep Space Nine cast, because there was stuff going on behind the scenes. Like, Avery Brooks was sort of a tough presence to be around, and the Na Visitor and Alexander Siddig were married and then they weren't. And which is... You know, when you mentioned before about having to hide that an actress is pregnant, they had to do that on, or I guess they didn't really. It was the reverse. An actress got pregnant and then they had to write it into the show. That's why Kira is pregnant for like that whole season of Deep Space Nine, is because her and Alexander Siddig were having a child. But in the show, it's Keiko and O'Brien's child. Science fiction, it's crazy. But especially those guys like Max Grodenchik and Jeffrey Combs and the other character actor types that were sort of like the workaday coming from theater, just happy to have a job that they could consistently go to. Like they really enjoyed bouncing off of each other and having a good time. And it really comes across in an episode like this, where it's just all those guys. It's none of the leads who are ostensibly the stars. It's just Armin Shimmerman and Max Grodenchik and Jeffrey Combs just like having probably some of the most fun they ever had making that show.
Yeah, it's definitely some of the more theatrical presences in this episode. I would have thought the most fun they had was in that scene when Brunt has to do Quark's nails. I would have thought he would have enjoyed that a bit more. For the listener, I highly recommend the Deep Space Nine documentary, What We Left Behind. It's amazing. Like, it's so nice. I mean, it's frankly just nice to watch, because it's nice to see all of these cast members come together and just talk about how great their experience was, and sometimes not great, and they're all just, you know, they're all just friends, and they're all bonding and talking to each other, and also just looking back with affection at how interesting Deep Space Nine was, and what they all brought to it, and the evolution of it. It's great. If you can get your hands on it, it's a wonderful and very well made documentary. There's also a great moment at the start where Jeffrey Combs' glasses are broken. He's wearing glasses that only have one arm. It's really strange. It takes you out of the documentary for a minute, but it is very funny. But you don't need to just watch. You don't need to just watch it for that.
They try to write what a hypothetical season 8 would be, sort of interspersed throughout parts of the documentary, which is super interesting.
Well, as far as I'm aware, in terms of Combs joining the Star Trek world, as far as I'm aware, the story goes that he initially auditioned for Riker, Jonathan Frakes' role in Next Gen. His agent apparently just sent him there and was like, he's like, I'm not going to get this role. And the agent's like, just go, you'll meet people. It was like a cattle call. So he went. He obviously didn't get it, but he met Jonathan Frakes. I think initially Renee got him in for the role of the very first role he did on Deep Space Nine, Tyrion.
It's in Meridian.
Yeah, because they were old theater buddies. So I think he was like, come on and do this role. And I think I think Jonathan Frakes directed that episode.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's when Jonathan Frakes was like, hey, we've met, do you want to come back? I believe. And then I think Ira Stephen Bear, after the first episode that he did as Wayun, when they inadvertently killed him, they were like, hey, actually, if we can find a way to make it like you didn't actually really die, do you want to come back? So they loved him so much that that they had to have more. That's why the Vorta can clone themselves.
Exactly, yes. An entire fundamental trait of the existence of the Vorta is a contrivance so Jeffrey Combs can be on it more.
Hell yeah. You gotta get that Combs.
Hashtag get that Combs. Please like and subscribe.
Yeah, I just love the idea of, imagine what it would have been like to have Next Gen with Jeffrey Combs as Riker. And like all of the same character traits, you know, like this swarthy captain guy, except it's Jeffrey Combs.
He would be a short king, because Jeffrey Combs is not a tall guy,
No.
and Riker's like 6'3".
Yeah.
Imagine like Riker like doing Jeffrey Combs doing like the backwards chair, like leg over the thing, like that exact same level of swagger.
He would still be a powerful force.
Oh yeah.
Make no mistake. But, you know, I think Jonathan Frakes does a good job. I think he is...
Oh yeah.
I think he's a good Riker. And I generally just think that Combs is better at these. I think that's why he's so good at Wayun. He's good at cunning, insipid little men with, like, delusions of grandeur. He's very good at delusions of grandeur.
Well, yeah, and when he's had to be the hero, it's always like he's a fish out of water, or like is out of his depth, doesn't quite know what's going on, whether it's like From Beyond or that movie with Cyclone, the one with the motorcycle.
Yes.
Where he's just like a guy who's just like, I don't know what's going on, everything's out of control.
One of my favorite Jeffrey Combs vehicles is the very underrated Felony. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have not seen that.
That is not a sci-fi. It is not a horror movie. It's just a straight up and down classic action movie where he's the lead, and I won't spoil the ending. I mean, it's a pretty obvious ending, but yeah, he just gets to be like everyman action hero guy. You know, he even gets a romance. It's an alarmingly normal role for Jeffrey Combs, but it's also a huge amount of fun. Yeah, he just gets to be like Bruce Willis for an episode, you know?
Oh, interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, no, it's great.
He does this Ferengi, and then, you know, even on Enterprise, like, he does a different Ferengi, and it's a different thing. The makeup looks different. Like, he doesn't repeat himself. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about Jeffrey Combs, is that he, unless being specifically asked and paid to repeat himself, he typically does not, even with similar material, he finds a new way in, and it's great.
From what I've read, just in general, like, outside of Star Trek, in general, I know from interviews that he has and had a fear of being like typecast, and I think that he was, especially in like the 90s after Re-Animator, where he got a lot of like crazy scientist doctor roles, and I think that he forced himself in those roles to bring something new to the table every time, because it's like, even if they're asking but not asking me to just do Herbert West again, I'm gonna do something different, because I don't just want to be Herbert West for the rest of my life. And he does, you know, like he plays a doctor in heaps of things, and you know, he even plays, there's other roles where he's like mad scientist guy, quote unquote, and he still manages to bring something slightly different, slightly new to the role every time, and that's why he's my favorite guy.
I can't argue with that.
All right, Andy Webb, anything to plug?
Not specifically. I'm sort of out of the realm of the like ongoing performer, podcaster, comedian source for a lot of this stuff. But if you would like to hear me, this is not the first time I've done a podcast dedicated to one person's filmography. If you're familiar with YouTuber Patrick Willems, he did a show called originally called We Heart Hartnett, and then it became Can't Get Enough of Keanu, where he covered with some of his co-writers for his YouTube stuff the filmography of Josh Hartnett. So I was on the Penny Dreadful Season 3 episode talking about that. Cool. And then when we covered Keanu Reeves, this would have been like right before everything shut down, which is why the podcast isn't happening at the moment, because we like to do it in person. We covered Speed.
Excellent. That's
out there. Those episodes get very long because we just go deep on all sorts of random stuff related to those properties and those actors. So you can find me there. if you thought this was nice and you like the sound of my voice. There's just not a lot going on there right now, but you can find me on Twitter at WebSlinger, WEBB Slinger, like Spider-Man.
Like Spider-Man.
If you look up my username plus Jeffrey Combs' tag, you can see the one scrape I got into with him on Twitter one day when I accidentally tagged him in something.
And as usual, you can find this podcast on at Re-AniMates Pod on Twitter and Instagram, at Re-AniMates Podcast on Facebook and Tumblr, and you can find Re-AniMates Podcast on YouTube if you want to watch the episodes there. Otherwise, just in whatever podcast app you use, whichever you fancy. I'm not going to judge you. But as usual, just do all that nonsense. Like, subscribe, rate, send a message, say hi to me, pat a dog, say hi to the cat. I don't know, just live your life and be nice, please. But thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
It's been great. It's been great to chat about Deep Space Nine, and now I'm going to go watch some more, I think.
Well, you've got the whole rest of the day ahead of you.
Yes, and the whole rest of lockdown. Maybe I'll just fill it with DS9.
Again and again and again. It's a renewable resource.